At the time, we were double income, no kids, young people. So on the weekends, we'd be getting in the car and driving across town to get breakfast and get coffee. So my whole plan was I wanted somebody to cook breakfast and make me coffee so I could go over there and sit and read the paper. But instead, we had that life learning of Katrina that, maybe there wasn't somebody else that was going to do something. We had to find it in ourselves if we wanted something to happen. So, we kind of got talked into this idea that, well, you're smart, you're engineers. Don't you think you can figure it out? Well, that's like throwing a gauntlet down to an engineer, because we're like, Eric on his side, he's like, I've drilled 30,000 feet in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm like, I've prevented, thousands of people from dying in environmental accidents. Of course we can figure out a restaurant.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge. We welcome our guest, Miss Jennifer Weishaupt, co-founder of Ruby Slipper Cafe and Ruby Sunshine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
So Ruby Slipper is like a breakfast brunch place at kind of 7 to 2 or 3
Yes,
PM
exactly.
kind of
We specialize in breakfast and brunch, and we kind of focus on the daytime part, and we generally are kind of open 7 to 2, a little later on the weekends because sometimes people take a little longer to wake up.
So kind of defining the brand, there's Benedict's, there's Mimosas, Bloody Marys. What else would you add to that list?
French toast, pancakes, all the eggs and omelets and all that good stuff, along with some really great burger, great BLT, some sandwiches.
Yeah, and a vibrant atmosphere.
Yes.
So I love that on Magazine Street.
Yeah.
So what are some of your personal favorites on the menu?
Oh, that's always such a good question. I would say probably my go-tos are, we have a thing called the Peacemaker, which we came up with at some point, which is basically a mix and match Benedict. We have about 6 or so Benedicts on the menu. So the mix and match, you can pick your 2 favorites. My 2 favorites are the Eggs Cochon, which is our apple braised, slow cooked pulled pork, and our Chicken St. Charles, which is fried chicken with some delicious tasso cream sauce.
It may be that's exactly what I had last time I was there.
It's probably, one of the top 3 things that people get.
Yeah. So
and then on the sweet side, my favorite is probably the white chocolate bread pudding pancakes.
Oh my goodness. I have to try that next time. So where did the name Ruby Slipper originate?
Well, that's a great story. So, kind of goes back to the foundation of when we came up with this idea, and we were going to build our first restaurant in Mid-City, New Orleans, which was in the, kind of year or so following Katrina and the devastation of the neighborhood. And so Eric, my co-founder, he was working on design and construction and getting the space ready. And I was kind of going to handle marketing, which included coming up with a name. So I would come up with a name and he would tell me, nope, that's not a good one. So about 99 no's later, we were sitting at dinner one night and I got totally frustrated and said, well, I have this one idea, but I haven't wanted to tell you because I know this restaurant is essentially your baby and you're not going to let me do what I want to do with this name. He's like, okay, well, just tell me. So in the summer of 2006, after Katrina, we had a young son and he was a newborn. And I was listening to WWOZ, which is one of the, local wonderful radio stations in New Orleans. And the DJ was telling the story of her teenage daughter who had just returned from her evacuation in Houston. So senior year, had to stay out of town because of the flood damage to the schools. Comes home, and the night before is the first time she and her girlfriends get together. And she overhears the conversation that the girls are having, which was pretty much, where'd you go? Who'd you meet? What'd you learn? And her daughter said something profound that really stuck with me. She said, I learned that I grew up in Oz and every place else is just Kansas. And to me, that just really stuck in my head with this idea of, Dorothy and the ruby slippers and the Wizard of Oz and the idea of wanting to go home. And for all of us who were forced out of our homes during that period of time, we don't care how crazy and colorful and quirky and sometimes how corrupt things are in New Orleans. We just all wanted to come home. And so to me, the idea of that ruby slipper was about homecoming and being in this place that we all called home.
Now, how did you say no to that explanation?
So I just thought this man is not going to let me put a red high heel shoe with a sunny side up egg on it in the front of his restaurant. It's just not going to happen. Well, I was wrong, luckily. But I think it was important to get the 99 no's to get to the yes. And I think that's actually was an important learning as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So you have two brands now, Ruby Slipper and Ruby Sunshine.
Yes.
What's the difference? What's going on there?
The main difference is just keeping the Ruby Slipper brand kind of to our home of New Orleans and Louisiana. And then as we started to expand further to really try to find a sister brand that, has the same kind of feeling and, are people going to get it? Because I just told that story of Ruby Slipper and it was about the homecoming to New Orleans.
Yeah.
And that was special to us. So we now have these two, kind of twin sisters, basically.
So as you grow your brand, it would grow under the Sunshine brand?
Yes. So when we launched into Tennessee back in 2019 is when we launched the Ruby Sunshine brand.
So how many locations do you have now?
We have 22 locations in 6 states across the South.
And how many are you growing? Like, have you got to a point where you can say, we kind of got an average that we're going to grow this year or next year?
Yes.
What that number per year be?
The goal for this year is going to be 6. Might be 6, might be 8, might be 5, right? That's how these things go. Right. Set that target at 6. And then, kind of what we've learned over time is that there's something like maybe a 30% growth rate. That's the way you can do it right without, really overstressing your people resources and, making sure that as you grow, the things that are important about your culture and your processes and your people grow with you effectively.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is grow too fast, right? And you ruin what's special about your business.
Right, exactly.
Plus the financial side of it.
Yeah.
Right?
All of that takes money, and it takes a lot more today than it did, 3 or 4 years ago, right?
Point. So there's something unique about your coffee in your restaurants. Tell us the backstory on that.
So when we, first came up with this idea and we were going to open this little corner breakfast and brunch restaurant in New Orleans, Eric and I both don't have a background in restaurants. But we do love food. And so we said, what are the kind of the foundational important things for a great breakfast restaurant? And of course, coffee is way up there on that list, right? So you got to have good coffee. And when we opened our 3rd restaurant in New Orleans is when we developed a relationship with Jeffrey Meeker at French Truck. And Jeffrey had won an award from New Orleans Magazine at the end of 2012, and we had won an award. And so we were at this award ceremony together, and that's how we met each other. And I was fascinated by his story because at the time, he had kind of stumbled upon coffee roasting and got really passionate about it. And he was roasting coffee in his laundry room with a little mini roaster he had bought. And he said, I want to come show you what I can make. We had another local roaster that we were working with prior to that. So we said, of course, we'd love to give you the chance to do it. And let's see if you can, match the quality of this other coffee that we were currently using. And Jeffrey came in and, he did that for us and made us a breakfast blend. And, one of the things about the relationship, fast forward, we've been in a partnership with them for 10 years. And, as we've grown, they've grown their roasting business and, supply our locations and help us with our equipment. They expanded their business into Tennessee, not, too far off from the time that we expanded into Tennessee. So, we have this great coffee, not just drip coffee, but their espresso coffees, as well as their iced coffee, which I think is, my favorite thing on earth is French Truck's iced coffee, which we proudly serve in our restaurants.
Yeah. Man, what a good relationship. Y'all have been a good customer for them, I can only imagine.
Yes.
So you're an engineer by training?
Yes, I'm a chemical engineer, and actually that's how I came to New Orleans. I went to Tulane for my master's degree in chemical engineering a really long time ago, and had every intention of, moving back to New York, which is where I'm from, and getting a job there. And, things just have a way of working themselves out. I got a great job in the New Orleans area that I loved, and shortly after got a job with Shell Oil Company, and then spent the majority of my career with Shell.
At some point, you start flipping houses. How I mean, it's fascinating because you've got you're a chemical engineer with one of the great companies, and yet you're out there flipping houses. How'd you get into that?
So I think that's where my kind of entrepreneur story really starts. So back in 1999, which is when that started, I had just gotten my job with Shell, and I had been, kind of out of graduate school for about 2 years. I said, okay, I'm an engineer, so I had this whole life plan, and one of those tick boxes was buy a house, because that's a smart investment, right? Well, the struggle that I was having as a single young woman or a single young person was there weren't a lot of houses in New Orleans that I could afford and also feel safe living there. And one of my good friends, who is also an entrepreneur now, she said she already owned a home, but she said, I think I really want to invest in real estate. So she had come up with this idea and basically pitched it to me that we would form an LLC. She had done all the research, and we'd buy a house together. I could live in it, and we'd have another tenant, and they'd pay rent. And, this would be a great investment for her, lower risk, and great for me, lower risk. Right. So we started this partnership. And then a few years later, when I got married, it was like, well, Louisiana is a community property state. I don't really know how this works, but I'm assuming that half this house might be yours, so you're going to have to do half the work. So we just kind of started, doing that.
So
meanwhile,
you continue to do other properties?
So yeah, it wasn't for about 2 years that we then decided, with a bigger partnership now that Eric was involved, that we were going to buy a house and flip it, and we'd go to sheriff's auction and research these houses. And that's actually where we met our business banker, who's with B1 Bank. He used to, at the time, had been with another local bank that we worked with, and started our relationship with him as we needed. Keene? That was Chris Keene, and we needed to get funding, for these crazy houses we were buying at sheriff's auction.
And he took care of you.
And he did, yeah. And then we followed him for a few more banks until he's landed at B1.
Okay, so you're flipping houses, and how many did you end up doing?
I think we did about a dozen altogether.
Awesome.
Got very active during Katrina. Eric eventually, he also was an engineer, electrical engineer, and he worked in the oil field. He worked for Schlumberger, did a lot of deep water offshore work in the Gulf of Mexico. He had an opportunity to leave his job with a pretty nice package back, about 20 years ago. and went full time into, started another LLC, bought a house at auction, and, kind of went full time into flipping houses. So, the first house that we bought with that LLC with no other partners was July of 2005. So he
a couple of months before Katrina.
A month before Katrina, he got that house and gutted it, and then Katrina hit. Oh. And so at the time that Katrina hit, we had our personal home, 2 investment properties, one in New Orleans and one in Waveland, Mississippi, with the friend that I initially started this story with, and then one property that just he and I owned.
And so did they all get hammered?
They all did. I was pregnant, evacuated to Houston, working for Shell in Houston at the time, pregnant with our first child, and dealing with 8 insurance companies, 4 flood and 4 property. So,
okay. Welcome to real estate, right? Then New Orleans is going through this rebuilding, just like you had to go through with your properties, right?
Yes.
But the whole city's rebuilding.
Yes.
And tell us how that led to that. There's a disconnect here for me. How chemical engineer, okay, house flipping, okay, that's pretty entrepreneurial. The restaurant leap is, how did you end up in the restaurant business?
So at the time, we were renovating some houses. The neighborhood got flooded. We had been pretty active in the neighborhood organization right before Katrina. And then when Katrina happened, I got very involved in the neighborhood organization. My focus at the time was really from an economic development standpoint. I had no experience in economic development, but I knew from talking to neighbors that when you'd ask somebody, were they going to come home, were they going to rebuild, one of the big factors was are these businesses in our neighborhood going to come back? Nobody wanted to come back to a wasteland. Right. And then, so I started reaching out and finding business owners, and I made a spreadsheet, and I'd, call people and track them down and say, are you going to come back and rebuild in the neighborhood? And they'd say, well, I don't know if I'm going to come back, or all the people going to come back. So it was kind of chicken and the egg situation. Wow. Yeah. And so I just, with the neighborhood organization, we really worked to kind of give each side of that discussion some assurances and comfort that, look, we can do this, but we have to do it together. One side can't do it without the other side. And so that kind of progressed to, I ended up becoming the president of the neighborhood organization at some point. And this opportunity at this former corner store from our neighborhood came up that a neighbor, wanted to buy. And in the pre-Katrina world, we had always said, look, if anybody ever gets that spot, it'd make a great little coffee shop.
Somebody.
Right.
Would need to do that.
Yeah. It's like, we don't have a good coffee shop nearby in our neighborhood. And at the time, we were double income, no kids, young people. So on the weekends, we'd be getting in the car and driving across town to get breakfast and get coffee. So my whole plan was I wanted somebody to cook breakfast and make me coffee so I could go over there and sit and read the paper. But instead, we had that life learning of Katrina that, maybe there wasn't somebody else that was going to do something. We had to find it in ourselves if we wanted something to happen. So, we kind of got talked into this idea that, well, you're smart, you're engineers. Don't you think you can figure it out? Well, that's like, throwing a gauntlet down to an engineer, because we're like, Eric on his side, he's like, I've drilled 30,000 feet in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm like, I've prevented, thousands of people from dying in environmental accidents. Of course we can figure out a restaurant. So we did what any, kind of good, competent engineers would do. And we went on the internet and we looked for answers. And, this is the part of the story that always makes people scratch their head. Eric found this website called restaurantowner.com, and they have a magazine called Restaurant Startup. And for $12 a month, we got a subscription, and they had it was basically restaurants for dummies. So they had all of these templates in Word and in Excel. So it was like, I need to build a business plan. I need to build an employee manual. I need to understand how I create a budget. I need to understand how much I should spend on food and how much I should spend on labor. What should my occupancy cost be? How do I write a schedule for servers? How do I write a schedule for... So all of these things I just went on and found and started developing. And meanwhile, he was really focused on, the design and the construction of the building.
Okay, so you decide... Who bought the building?
A neighbor who lived
and then
next
you
door.
guys all right.
We got the first floor. We rented the first floor, and that neighbor had a publishing business that they put upstairs.
Okay. So Eric's in there, and he's going to town and making this thing Y'all's, and you're doing all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So menu. I mean, you didn't how did you get there?
I would say that like kind of the foundational basis of the menu was things Jennifer and Eric liked to eat. And we traveled a lot. We were young. We didn't have a child yet, kind of before the idea came up. And so we would make lists of like these great breakfasts and, kind of what we thought was good about them. So when it kind of came down to actually time to make a menu, I was smart enough to know I couldn't do that. So we hired basically a chef consultant who we gave all these ideas to and kind of helped, shape what the framework of the concept was. And then he came back with, here's some, you want 3 omelets, here's some omelet suggestions. And we actually, he cooked all that food in our kitchen in our home, and we tasted it and, tweaked recipes. And then he developed the actual, kind of recipe formats and spec books.
Okay. So finance-wise, you're going into a restaurant. How does a non-restaurateur convince a bank to support them in that endeavor?
We didn't take any loans.
Do tell.
We had no debt on the we didn't have any debt on the business for for a very, very long time. We basically funded the initial capitalization of the restaurant business from profits we had made in our real estate business. And as engineers and kind of, as I said earlier, like have this life plan of, all the boxes you have to tick to be successful. One of those was that when Eric left his job and went to flip houses full time, we never lived off that money. We never spent it. We reinvested it in the business. So we never changed our lifestyle, and we lived on my one salary. When we needed to fund that initial location, because we didn't want to take a loan, and we knew, taking a loan against restaurant equipment is, hard. Right. We basically just we did it so frugally, it's shocking even to me now, now that I know how much it really costs to open a restaurant.
Especially now.
Yeah. So we did it very frugally, and, our business plan was basically, oh God, I hope we break even, which is not a great entrepreneur business plan. But really, it was a business that was built around rebuilding the community. It wasn't, Eric was going to keep flipping houses, and I was going to keep my job at Shell, and I was going to accomplish great things in mine, and he'd accomplish great things in his. And this, little cafe would be great for the neighborhood, and I'd have some place I could drink coffee and eat breakfast.
Yeah. But it must have been fun. Once the bricks and sticks are there, and you're going and putting the touches on it and making it yours, like the decor and the ambiance of it. That must have been pretty exciting.
It was really fun because, it kind of goes back to what was the foundation. What are the things that we thought, like, these are the things you have to have for success. And to me, it was all about the feeling a person would have when they walked in the door of that, like, letting out a deep breath. Like that, just your whole body should relax when you walk in, because you're like, oh, this place is going to be great.
Comfortable.
Yeah. And so, I don't know scientifically how you create that, but Eric had become a bit of almost a hoarder of discarded, historic elements after Katrina. He was, he'd drive around his pickup truck, and somebody had thrown out some heart pine wood floors, and was like, oh, I can't let that tongue and groove go to the landfill. It just, so we had this shed full of stuff, including mantles that had come out of houses. And, so that's all the stuff that we repurposed, to build the bar and to kind of put around the wainscoting and things like that. And so it gave it this feel like it had been there for a long time. It had a feeling of authenticity would be how I would describe it.
So cool.
So, we built it out for next to nothing, and just had the, oh God, please let it break even plan. And we were lucky that On an operating expense side, we broke even in week 1. So not on what we had invested from a capital standpoint,
right,
but on, money in equals money out. We were always in the black.
Unheard of. We would like to thank Castro Real Estate Services for sponsoring the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Castro Real Estate Services is a full-service real estate brokerage firm based in Baton Rouge. They can handle commercial and residential transactions in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas. Need to buy or sell real estate? Call the company that cares about you. Castro Real Estate. Turnkey Solutions is a nationwide cybersecurity and IT systems expert, providing the services that growing businesses need to stay ahead of hackers, hurricanes, and IT nightmares. With 24/7 support teams and offices across Louisiana and Texas, they bring peace of mind to companies of all sizes. Their 5-star rated team provides lightning-fast IT support with the cybersecurity and business continuity solutions today's businesses demand. When you're looking for a technology partner to provide you with peace of mind, find out more by calling them at 225-224-6594 or chat with them online at www.tks.la/NXT. I read this thing that said that you kept working as an engineer.
I did.
For 7 more years.
Yes.
Eric kept flipping houses for 4 more years.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, wait a second. This defies everything that I've ever read about operating a restaurant. You have to be there. How did you make that happen?
So the houses that we were flipping that Eric was focused on were in this very tight square right around our personal home and the restaurant. Those 2 things were within a block of each other. And then the other houses, when we'd buy houses, they were probably within maybe 5 blocks. So he was in the restaurant every day.
Got it.
I worked a schedule at Shell where I was off every other Friday. So every other Friday I worked all day in the restaurant. I'd be there on the weekends. So we were there, but we weren't the people running it. And I think one of the things that had allowed us to become successful was being engineers, knowing how to put a plan in place and execute against a plan, and also kind of manage it like a project. You have this much money, and so that's what you got to spend. But also knowing we weren't experts in restaurants and that we needed to hire people who were experts in restaurants and who were, smarter than we were in this particular topic. And so what we ended up doing with that was, instead of, I think a lot of times people, you ask somebody a question and they tell you, like, this is the right way to do it because that's how I did it the last place. Well, I would never ask one person. I'd ask 4 people and I'd say, well, how do we come up with what's the best collaboration of these 4 things, which is really kind of a very basic engineering process. You're always iterating and you're like, how am I going to constantly make this process better? And it didn't matter if that process was how people got syrup on their table when they were having pancakes, or if it was, how are we going to wash and polish and roll silverware? It was like, don't ever come and tell me we do something this way because that's how we always did it. Right. There's always, different points of view. So it was really just all came down to the people. And I think for me, I had really learned that in my career at Shell, which, was a company that generally was, kind of has been recognized worldwide for how it treats its people, and understanding that people are your most valuable resource. And if you have the right people and you treat them well, you can be successful together.
Okay, so post Katrina, you're opening your first restaurant. You're not there full time for sure. You need quality people. Is it an instance where it just so happened because of what happened to Katrina, there were quality people more readily available then than at other times?
I would say, I think for us, one of the aspects of being a daytime restaurant with the breakfast brunch focus is that we got a lot of, there weren't a lot of restaurants that were doing just that day part at the time.
Got it.
In that respect, we were somewhat entrepreneurial and kind of groundbreaking on it. What that meant was there's a lot of very experienced people in hospitality who had maybe been in their careers for some period of time, and now they were ready to have a schedule that better matched their family needs.
Yeah, so not working at night.
Right. So there was a lot of people kind of coming out of fine dining or, dinner-focused restaurants that saw the daytime opportunity as a positive. So we found a lot of experienced people. Now, don't get me wrong. The stories that we could sit here and talk about, the bad people, the bad apples in the bunch, they're pretty extensive, and there was a lot of hard lessons we learned there. But I think
that's inherent with the business.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Possibly much more so post Katrina.
Yeah, well, I think in hospitality in particular, there's a lot of cash, so there's a lot of attraction there. There's unfortunately also, a lot of people who get into substance abuse and addiction issues. There's a lot of people who live paycheck to paycheck, so you kind of put all those things together and you can end up with some people that are really not good for your business. But the great people we had and that, started that with us and helped us grow it, they far outweighed any of the negatives.
For sure. I read, interestingly, that when you started, it was 5 days a week.
Yes.
Which seemed to make a lot of sense. Like it was controlled.
Yes.
Right? So how long did it take you before you expanded those days?
Oh, good. That's a good question. I should say that in the course of opening our first 3 restaurants, I also had 3 children, so I lost a lot of brain cells in that time period.
Not fair.
I feel like it was maybe when we opened, there was a point that we went to 6 days. It probably took us a couple of years before we went to 6 days. And that 7th day was a hard one. But I feel like it was when we expanded outside of New Orleans that we went to, a 7-day operation.
So when you started, was there an intent ever initially to go beyond those 4 walls?
Absolutely not.
And so what happened? Why did that change?
People really liked it.
Yeah, so success.
Yeah, you're
in the black from week 1. That's a really good start, right? And so people were knocking your doors down?
Yeah, we had this tiny 50-seat restaurant on a block off Canal Street with no visibility, kind of in the middle of a neighborhood. And within about 3 months, we had, hour-long waits on Sunday, 45-minute waits on Saturday. People started, being on a wait on a Friday or a Monday if it was a holiday weekend. And it was really the guests that inspired us to consider opening a second location. It was like, we don't have enough space all these people want to eat with us and we just can't do it.
It's kind of that in Austin. There's Franklin Barbecue,
right? Yes,
and it's part of the culture is you wait.
Yes,
if you want to eat there, you're going to wait. And in that instance, it's 3 or 4 hours or longer. But there's something that happens with, your brand when it's known that people are willing to wait 30, 45 minutes or an hour to eat there.
Well, I think one of the keys to that wait was another one of those foundations of the business, which was great brunch cocktails, right? So one of the nice things about New Orleans is you can get a drink at the bar and sit outside and wait. So while there might be, 50 or 100 people sitting out waiting their turn, probably at least half of them had a mimosa or a Bloody Mary or a brandy milk punch or an Irish coffee or something in their hand, and they're there with friends and family, and they're already having a good time.
I can hear the cash register just cha-chinging. So I was fascinated to learn that your first 4 restaurants were really in a tight radius, like
2.3 miles, I think it is.
I mean, that's unreal.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean, if you're going to expand, that would be the most idyllic way you could possibly do it, right?
Right.
Okay, so
can make the whole loop in about 30 minutes if you just popped your head in and said hi.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That is just fascinating. You're building your brand. Your first unit was in an older building. Did you continue on that pattern? Were you able to?
We did. So it really, opening that first restaurant inspired this love, kind of bringing together this idea of this love of historic buildings with this love of building community and a place you can do it through sharing a meal and through food, which is, just such a wonderful thing. So we, looked for and found historic buildings that, in the early days had already been restaurants, and we, kind of brought new life to them.
So a lot of the infrastructure was there that you'd need for a restaurant. So
yes.
Making that conversion was a lot more affordable than otherwise.
Yes. And then it was our 5th location, which was the first one outside New Orleans. In 2015, we opened in Pensacola, Florida, on the kind of Palafox in Maine, which is a great area in Pensacola.
But a little bit outside of your 2.3 mile radius.
Yeah, a little bit.
How did you get there? What was the logic there? That's a nice little jump.
The logic there was I wanted to be someplace that was clearly not New Orleans, because we really wanted to test the idea outside the market. So like Baton Rouge wasn't far enough. It's too much connectivity with New Orleans and Baton Rouge. So we might just do okay in Baton Rouge or do well in Baton Rouge because people already knew us so well. So we wanted to go somewhere that was kind of far enough away.
Okay, so let me interrupt you for a second. So in doing this concept of a test, you're telling me that y'all were now thinking about, growing.
Does this have legs? Yeah. So, it was like we opened location 1, pretty much instant success. We go to location 2, which is our location at 200 Magazine Street, a block off Canal in the business district. And location had been restaurants for about 20 years and had 10 different failed restaurants. So people were like, you're crazy. Why are you going in this location? Mm. Well, it's cheap and we're going to get in and, either it's going to do well or not, but it's not a lot of risk for us. Location 3, that one becomes an instant hit. Location 3 in the Marigny becomes a hit. We open on Canal Street, literally 6 blocks away from our location at 200 Magazine. People say you're crazy. You're going to cannibalize. That one becomes a hit. So we had these discussions, in the course of these 4 years, really asking ourselves, is this just, kind of a post-Katrina phenomenon that we experienced in New Orleans, where there were so many people who wanted to help rebuild the city, whether that was physically coming down and rolling their sleeves up and rebuilding, coming there and running nonprofits, or choosing to spend their tourist dollars in New Orleans. Was that just goodwill after Katrina that people, wanted to be in New Orleans, and, also the culture of New Orleans, people will drink a mimosa at 7 a.m. Does that happen in other places? Can you go to Pensacola, Florida, and people are going to want to sit at the bar and have a margarita or a Bloody Mary?
And the answer was?
And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. And so we opened that location in middle of 2015, and in that first year, that location won Best New Restaurant in Pensacola. Not Best Breakfast Restaurant, not Best Brunch Restaurant. It did win those things as well, but actually won like the top award from their newspaper Best of contest, and we won Best New Restaurant. And that to me was just so overwhelmingly amazing. And it spoke to the ability to recreate that same thing that I described, that feeling when you walk in and you're like, okay, I'm excited. I want to eat here. This is going to be great, because the staff was happy and they're real hospitality professionals, and they wanted every guest to have a great experience, and they wanted people to have that mimosa or that Bloody Mary.
That's fantastic. So somewhere in this timeline, you're ready to step out of your career and get into the business full time.
Yes, it was right. It was pretty much right in that same timeline that we were opening that first location outside of New Orleans.
Okay, good. So, but I read somewhere, well, you really loved your job.
I love my job so much.
Right? And the transition to this restaurant business wasn't easy at first.
It wasn't. Well, I think it's important, when you talk about entrepreneurs, it's easy for us to talk about the wins, but the most important things usually come from the losses. And in this instance, kind of the way that the story goes and how I ended up in the business full time was that there had been a pretty significant cash theft in one of our locations. And it was, we were investigating to figure out.
Overtime?
No, like someone stole money out of the safe. A big chunk of money that shouldn't have been in the safe. Right. And in the course of doing that investigation and kind of trying to figure out what happened, you really start to uncover where you thought you had systems, but the systems had broken down, or you thought you had communication, but communication had broken down. And I learned in that couple of months of, kind of this devastating event that, was a pretty significant betrayal, that the culture had been degrading. And I firmly believe that I couldn't hire somebody else to fix my culture, that, we built the business on a culture, and that if I wanted to fix it, I had to be there alongside Eric to work on it together, because the business had grown quite a bit at this point, right? And so as things would happen, it happened to be in the same moment in time in the oil industry where oil prices were dropping, and all the big players, including Shell, were doing pretty significant reductions in force. And so I always tell people I'm the luckiest person on earth, and I, raised my hand and got a great package from Shell and left on great terms, and kind of sailed off into the sunset to go in full time and really help fix the things that had broken down in the culture of our business.
God. I mean, I heard that, I read that somewhere, and I'm like, this sounds really nice to exit with a package and
right, and on good terms. I didn't have to hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah, that's awesome. But I think I saw where it took you some time to really it's a culture shock. I mean, you're talking about culture issues there, but the difference in the culture between your big corporate job at Shell and a restaurant business
is night and day. No, it couldn't be different, more different. And so, I tell that story to say I didn't really leave my job willingly. I left because I felt I had an obligation that if I wanted this business to be successful, and I wanted all of these people who worked for us, who had put their faith and relied on, that we were going to be able to help them earn the money that they needed to have what they needed in their lives, that I needed to make that commitment. But what I'll tell you is that I was probably not the greatest person to work with for the first 12 months, because I feel like I was really having a pity party for myself for a little while. And it was just kind of one day where I was, having this same storyline in my head. It wasn't like I was really being bad to anybody else, but I just really had this kind of negative soundtrack in my own head of I gave up this career that I'd worked so hard for, and I had such high aspirations. And I woke up one day and was like, are you going to let this be the rest of your life? That you're just going to keep talking about something that you made the choice to walk away from? And you have all these really amazing people that work for you. They're really fun. It's way more fun to work in a restaurant business than it is to necessarily work in the oil field. And what if I just changed my attitude about it and stop lamenting what isn't and focused on what is?
And that worked.
It worked. It was a big change, a big turning point.
I read that where, it became a focus of yours to help your staff, find their greatness, to find, what their contribution to the business would be. And you took a lot of gratification in that. Yes.
So, for me, it was always about the people. And I think that goes back to when I was a young engineer and I was, kind of in my first job, and you have these different experiences with your supervisors and bosses, et cetera. And then when I was in the position of looking for jobs in Shell, I had at some point very early in my career decided that I was always going to choose my job based on the person I was going to work for and what they were going to do to develop me as a person and make me a better engineer and a better leader, not this is what the job says it is on paper. So I was kind of on this quest in my own career to find a great leader of people. And what I found is that that's kind of a unicorn. It's a hard thing to find, even in a company as great as Shell. But I thought that was so important. That was how I focused on my people. It was I need to help people see their own greatness. I need to give them the tools and give them the support so that they can actually achieve it. And even when they don't believe in themselves, I have to keep reminding them that I believe in them.
So you're in the business full time. You've accepted.
And now I'm running operations.
Yeah, you've accepted your destiny.
Yes.
And you run operations. And so it's time to really grow, right?
Yes. There was a point that was okay, if we're going to do this, are we going to really go all in and do it?
So store number 5's in Pensacola.
A year later, we opened one in Orange Beach. So we're at this, kind of one restaurant in 2 years, then one in 18 months, and then kind of one a year. And we could have just stopped and been very successful and very happy, but we wanted to push ourselves.
Yeah. So you kept growing.
Yep. So then 2017, we pushed ourselves to open 3 restaurants, one in New Orleans, one in Baton Rouge, 2 in New Orleans, one in Baton Rouge. And just kind of kept setting our sights on bigger growth after that, and built the organization, the infrastructure of like our home office in particular, to be prepared to grow.
Continued to grow through 18 and 19?
Yes. Yep. Had great growth in 2018. 2019 is when we launched our Ruby Sunshine brand, and we really decided to kind of go further than that, like 3-hour drive, which had been my my goal when I picked Pensacola. I could drive there, I could spend the day, and I could drive home, and I wouldn't have to leave my kids and be away overnight necessarily. Right. So now we were going to pick a place we had to get on an airplane to get to, and see how that worked.
That's a challenge. As you're moving around and opening, you're expanding into new states. Are you making adjustments in your menu to, like, is that a thing?
Yes. So, a great example, when we went to Pensacola, we felt like we needed a fish sandwich on the menu because, particularly grouper, because grouper's like everywhere you go is great grouper. But what we learned through that was like nobody wanted to eat it. That they weren't going to come to Ruby Slipper for a grouper sandwich. They were coming to us for all these things they couldn't get.
Oh, that's interesting.
We did find things over time. I think shrimp and grits is a great example. New Orleans and Louisiana have a very, we have barbecue shrimp and grits, and it's a very specific type of recipe, but there's other states that have their own version of shrimp and grits. And so ultimately, as we started expanding in the South, it was like, we need to come up with a version that everybody will like, because the worst thing is to make a delicious dish and someone says, well, this isn't like, South Carolina shrimp and grits, or this isn't like Tennessee shrimp and grits.
Yeah, fascinating. Pivotal is pleased to sponsor the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Pivotal is a commercial building contractor that performs new building construction, building maintenance, tenant improvements, renovations, and additions. Pivotal has been in business for over 25 years. The Pivotal team is simply the best. They have an impeccable safety record, and they crush schedules. A focus on quality and professional communication is at the root of their success. Pivotal also performs programs for clients who build in multiple markets, with current projects in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. If you are looking for the perfect addition to your project team, a contractor who can deliver the results you need to succeed, Pivotal is a one. When it's critical, call Pivotal. They can be found online at pivotalperforms.com. This podcast is sponsored by Mayhall, Fondren Blaze, a Louisiana business litigation firm offering sophisticated legal advice that is tailored to meet the needs of their individual clients, including a wide variety of litigation, complex business negotiations, corporate formations, closings, and title examination. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the expertise of MFB, a Louisiana practice made for business. Learn how we can work with you at www.mfbfirm.com. Okay, so in growing your business, Jennifer, how important a role is technology?
So for us, technology played a really important role kind of, very early on. And I think the first, beyond a point of sale system, and we had actually a kind of an antiquated one that we started with, but it had a pretty open back end, so we could, you could kind of make it do what you wanted it to do versus some of the bigger ones that you had to call somebody and they'd have to do it for you. So beyond the POS, which is the basic piece of technology everybody has, we got a wait list system called No Wait. We were probably one of their very early adopters. We were certainly their first customer in the New Orleans area. Eventually, No Wait got bought by Yelp and became the Yelp wait list. But we were with them from 2011, early on when we opened that second restaurant, and we expanded into all our locations. And that was a real game changer for us because, we talked about the weight. That weight was replicated in all of the markets, and not, having a host stand outside and yell names is not effective, when there's actually 100 people outside. Right, so it was cute when it was a tiny corner store and it was maybe 50 people and they knew to stay close by, but we needed something a little more robust.
So they're getting the text messages.
Yeah. So we started with that. We changed over all our POSs, kind of about 10 years into the business, a little less than 10 years in the business. And went to Toast, which is a system that a lot of people use now, but we were kind of an early adopter in New Orleans, and kind of early adopter of the use of handhelds at the table, because we were always looking for ways, how do you get the accuracy of the order and how do you improve the turn times so that there's not a lot of wait. And one of the things we found was a bottleneck for us was when the servers had to stand at that POS and wait their turn to go type their order in. So we went to handhelds, and, we adopted systems that many of them not guest facing, but that were there to make either our staff's life better or the guest's life better, even if the guest didn't understand that we know how it was doing that through service steps, et cetera.
So I asked you about kind of the excitement of doing your first restaurant and the decor and like creating the culture. You've got the historic building feel. You've got, and I was curious of the importance of music in the restaurant business. I saw on your website, it's kind of like something y'all pride yourself on.
Yeah. So, when it was just in New Orleans, we'd be playing WWOZ and, could play local music. Once we got big enough, it was like, well, what are we going to do how are we going to play music in Pensacola that's going to feel like New Orleans? And you have to get these music systems and pay your licensing fees. And we ended up you're starting to build a playlist. And then the staff got so excited about the playlist. So there was a lot of energy around it. So cool. we ended up making a Spotify playlist that, people can grab right off our website. That's called Brunch Jams. That
no kidding.
Is it's some of the music that you'll hear in the restaurant.
So that's a little bit of experiential marketing kind of stuff that we talked about recently with another guest. So tell us what Lagniappe means at Ruby Slipper.
So Lagnappe's important to us. Obviously it's like a Creole or French Cajun word that means a little something extra. That's kind of the simplified version of it. And for us, it was about the style of service, and it was a way that we could help people understand. We didn't want people to feel like everything, they were either going to get nickeled and dimed or that, everything's an add-on and it's all about the money. And so the way that we train our staff with Lagniappe is, when someone, a real popular one might be Benedict's. Most of our Benedicts have hollandaise on it, and all of our food's made from scratch. So our hollandaise is really delicious. And if somebody gets a Benedict and they want extra hollandaise, you don't go hit a button that says add hollandaise and it charges $1 because they already have hollandaise on that Benedict. You go to the Lagniappe menu and you give them a little something extra and you pick that hollandaise that's included. Nice. And you're bringing it to them. And it's about that idea of just as if this person was a guest in your home, and if they said, can I have a little more salad dressing, of course you're going to give it to them because you want them to have a great experience. So it was really about that idea of how do we make the guest feel like they're getting this very, kind of gracious, hospitable experience.
Again, it seems like it's managing the details. That's something that would come up again and again and again. Can you imagine how many restaurants don't have a system for doing that? Right. But it seems to be a common thread through what I've read and heard about your business is you put in systems in place to take care of everything that's identifiable.
Right. Yep.
So let's talk about the 4 Ps as far as your operations. There's some approaches that you take in managing your business. What are the 4 Ps?
So for us, people, always the number one. Profit, because that's the reason we're all in business, right? We're in business to make money, and it's foolish to not just be transparent and say that.
Absolutely.
PR and marketing. So how do we let people know what we're doing and why they want to spend time with us? And place, which really for us has to do with our facilities and the growth of our business. So how we do site selection. So it was a kind of a way that we came up with to have a common language and to run our executive leadership team meetings in a, kind of a very structured way, so that we were talking about the right things at the right tempo, so that they, the information that everyone in the organization needed, would get to them in a timely manner.
Did I understand that you actually take time in your meetings, you'll block out, okay, this week we're talking about people.
Yeah.
Next week we'll be talking about profit.
Yeah. So for me, when I was in the CEO seat, kind of when I was the COO to the CEO, we kind of developed this process where it would be, week 1 was people, week 2 was week 2 is profit. And that had to do with timing of when to financials. You finished the 1 month, so now you're, by week 2, you have your financials ready for the prior month. Week 3 was always PR and marketing, and week 4 is place. And then, we have some months that have a 5-week schedule, and week 5 in those months, we would use that as like a kind of leadership development topic, where people could bring something to the table that they'd want to kind of have a collaborative discussion on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And does so that's happening at corporate, right?
Yep.
And is something similar happening at the your stores?
So then that would, kind of on the operational side, go down through our operations leaders at the time they were district managers. Now they're, directors of operation for their regions. And they would use a similar structure because they would get communications back, from us on those topics. They knew, information had to be fed up and fed back down in this kind of cadence across the course of the month.
So through the growth of the business, you've always been a co-founder, and then you kind of, I guess, worked part-time and then got in the business full-time, and then became chief operating officer and then CEO for some period of time there. But both you and Eric are out of those positions.
Yes.
Right? And describe to us how you were able to do that and what your team structure looks like now.
Right. So kind of every entrepreneur's dream, how do you get to the other side, right? And I think, people who are serial entrepreneurs in particular understand this, because you have to get to a point where you're not constantly working in the business if you're going to actually work on the business, and you're going to have all these other ideas that are coming up in your head, and, how are you going to do, try those things as well. So it started with, really the first kind of major hire was a CFO, and knowing, that was not the expertise for either of us, and we needed somebody who was going to get all of those things in order. And there's a lot of integrated software that is really needed to make the finance function work well as you grow. So, kind of CFO is a critical position. Then we hired a COO. At this time I was the CEO and was kind of directly running operations, but we had our big growth plans. And so, we needed to bring someone into that COO seat. Over time since then, we've, kind of added high-level people in real estate and construction and in purchasing, and then evolved to the point where we were comfortable with the leadership team we had, and that we could put a CEO in seat. Kind of Eric left about, 6 or 9 months ahead of me. So he was still integrally involved with real estate, but not the day-to-day. Didn't have to be sitting in the desk having the conversations, with the landlords. It was letting the person on the team do the work, and then him being there as kind of a coach and mentor and guidance on, this looks like a good decision and we should recommend it and move forward.
So co-founder, owner, and you are overseeing and board member?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you're overseeing your operation, and as a board member, just fine-tuning it with the input from the CEO, and that's the dream, right?
And for me, the part that, as we've talked today, you can hear it, the part that excites me is the people and their relationship with the processes, right? So it's like, how do we ensure that our people are getting what they need so that we follow processes, which is what I believe leads to success. So I've stayed, where Eric stayed closely involved with the real estate side, I've stayed closely involved with the culture piece. And so as I tell people, I get to do all the fun stuff now. So, I go to grand openings. When we are opening new restaurants, I talk to our new staff, personally and spend time with them to tell them the founding story, and they understand, kind of where did this business come from. And I want them to hear that from me. It's important to me. I celebrate big milestone anniversaries that staff have, and, anniversaries of locations. And, because our home office is in New Orleans, a lot of times we'll celebrate somebody's birthday. So I try to be there for those, team building type events, and just stay really connected to the business that way.
I heard that when one of your gifts is learning and remembering people's names.
Yes.
And that, I think I read that when at some point along the way, you had like 600 employees. You didn't know everyone's name, but you knew a lot of them.
Yes. So for me, there was a couple tricks. One is that I actually, when someone tells me their name, if I'm not 100% sure, like, did I get it right? I actually ask them, like, can you spell it for me, or, say it again, make sure I got their name right. And then I try to ask them something about themselves. And, it feels like the thing about them is what I actually remember, and then it tags itself to their name. But realistically, I was probably good up to about 300, 350. I could remember everybody. After that, my plan was always just before I'd walk into a location, I would pull up, we used a software system for scheduling. I'd pull up the schedule and I'd go through the list, and I'd remind myself the people that I knew. And when I saw somebody that I knew I hadn't met, I just introduced myself to them.
Yeah, powerful.
And, it's really meaningful to people when you remember their names. And it's also meaningful if you don't remember their name and you just say, gee, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Can you remind me what it is? Yeah. Instead of ignoring them, right. Which is what,
So what is that employee count up to now?
We are close to 700, right around, I think, kind of mid 6s to 700 right now.
That's fantastic. Okay, let's talk about other things that interest you. Some philanthropy.
Yes.
Tell us what you do there.
So I've always personally been very philanthropic, and, I think just part of who I am as a person, how I was raised, always was involved with nonprofits. When I was younger and didn't have any money, it was my time. And, one of the things I was real involved with was I was a member of Society of Women Engineers, and I'd go, do events with high school students to help them learn about what engineering is, and, encouraging women in particular to go into the sciences and engineering. So kind of started with more of like time involvement with things of that nature. And then luckily got to a point in my career and our success of our business that we were actually able to start a family foundation and fund a family foundation that we have a board, and we direct donations to, generally focused in New Orleans, most of the money, but in all the communities that we operate our business, we're, kind of interested. So, through our family foundation, we started that in 2019.
And what's the focus there?
It's generally focused on, things, I would say, things that are related to community building in some way. Always focused on, kind of women and children. Education is an important piece for me. So you see a lot of that in my history. Different boards that I've been fortunate enough to sit on always tend to have an education aspect to them. And a lot of times it's things, we've been personally involved in, or personally touched us that, we might have initially come into contact with through the restaurants, because we do a lot of, community donations and community support in the restaurants themselves. But that's more often can be more, providing food or hosting an event. This was a way to give organizations actual money, which they of course always need.
Yeah, for sure. The Lagniappe Crew Emergency Relief Fund.
Yes.
Is that a program of yours?
Yes. So, 2020 when COVID struck and everything shut down, obviously the hospitality industry and people in hospitality were one of the hardest hit sectors. And so instead of giving that year's donation from our family foundation to, the dozen or so nonprofits that we typically would look at, we took that money and we seeded a separate nonprofit that we created, the Lagniappe Crew Emergency Relief Fund. And that was a way that we could directly award individuals, kind of small grants. The grants ranged from like $250 to $1,000 to really help people who were in really tough situations personally due to COVID, whether that was illness or loss of a job or, something with their children, et cetera. So we were able to find a partner who matched what we put into it. And so, for 2020, 2021, 2022, we've continued that, kind of expanding it beyond just COVID, but to natural disasters that have occurred in Louisiana along the Gulf Coast over that time period.
That's fantastic. So when you look out, Jennifer, over the next 10 years, do you have a vision of where you think the Ruby Slipper Sunrise operation will be?
I think, so, if you kind of look at our current growth rate, I think we will be far beyond the South. I'm hoping that, by that point, Ruby Sunshine will be a national breakfast and brunch restaurant and a place that, one of the things that's important to Eric and I as we grow is that we still want people to feel that it's their neighborhood restaurant. And so we work really hard to try to not become cookie cutter and to make sure, we're selecting. We have a lot of really cool real estate out there that, a lot of historic adaptive reuse of different types of buildings. And that gets us really excited because you're doing something great for the community too, when you're able to put things back into commerce that, maybe had already lived their useful life in their first incarnation.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Jennifer, it was a treat learning about your business and diving into the details and to see what an incredible operator you are. And you could see that engineering mind just really, make the most out of the opportunity. And I don't think any of it's by luck that you had all those stores line up from the get-go as being, that was a hit, that was a hit, that was a hit. I think operationally you guys have got something special going on, and I love your restaurant. So continued success in all you do, and I do appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. I love the opportunity to talk about the business with you.
You're very good at it. Thank you. Jennifer's is the most unique restaurant entrepreneurial story I think you'll ever hear. I don't think 1 in 100,000 people could pull off what she did with Eric, and how they started the business while they had full-time careers, built it to 4 locations that were all just doing really, really well until and she went into it full-time. So what they have done and grown that business to the degree that it is right now is super impressive. We really appreciate Jennifer coming and sharing her stories. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.